Welcome back to the Brittany Hughes Show. Happy Thursday, everybody. Leftists are big mad this week. Oh, so terribly mad that a terrorism-sympathizing foreigner might be getting kicked out of the country because he's a, terrorism-sympathizing foreigner. And frankly, the fewer of those that we have in this country, the better, as far as I'm concerned. I'm not really sure why this is some controversial statement, but leftists sure seem to think that it is. So this is Columbia graduate Mahmoud Khalil. He is a Syrian-born Palestinian migrant who's here on a green card, and he was arrested on Saturday by Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents at his apartment at Columbia, a university-paid apartment, for helping lead anti-Israel protests on the university campus last year. These were the protests that went on under the Biden administration for months and months on college and university campuses all across this country, where Jewish students were harassed and assaulted and had to barricade themselves inside libraries for their own physical safety, and were actually told not to come to class because it might be too dangerous, where, anti-Semitic nutbags who've been indoctrinated by our left-wing education system held up signs openly calling for the death of the Jews and the annihilation of Israel, and calling for a global intifada and waving Hamas flags, that kind of thing. This is the sort of thing that Khalil, a Palestinian, was involved in and actually helped lead. He actually helped pass out flyers expressing open support for Hamas, which is a violent designated terrorist group, which is, of course, the same one that invaded Israeli neighborhoods and slaughtered over 1,000 people, including infants and toddlers, raping and beheading and burning people alive and hauling hundreds of other people off as prisoners and returning their dead, mutilated corpses months later, sometimes in the wrong coffin, apparently. Khalil actually was, in addition to promoting all of this and calling for the annihilation of Israel and promoting support for a terrorist group, was actually facing suspension from Columbia at one point in 2023 after the university failed to divest from Israel the way that protesters were demanding that they do. So a group of activists barricaded themselves inside Columbia's Hamilton Hall, and nearly 300 people were arrested in connection with that incident, which left the building just absolutely trashed, by the way. The whole thing was vandalized. There was garbage everywhere and chairs overturned, and there was spray paint on the walls, and it was a whole big thing. Khalil was originally slated to be suspended in connection with that incident, but the school actually ended up reversing that decision, and he was allowed to stay because, who really cares? Right? We're seeing right now what happens when you try to hold somebody like this accountable for being a Hamas-loving whack job. And while the Biden administration was more than willing to let all of that go, they kind of gave it a bit of a tacit head nod and a don't do that, and, then turned a blind eye and looked the other way. Nothing ever actually happened on a federal level because, after all, they were too busy holding the door open for millions of migrants, including violent rapists and murderers and drug dealers and the like over at the southern border. So what the heck did they care? But the incoming Trump administration has said that they've got absolutely no time for this garbage whatsoever. So they've arrested Khalil and are holding him in custody for deportation proceedings. He's still in custody in part because his lawyer and a whole bunch of leftists are demanding his release, so his deportation proceedings have been stayed while all of the legalese gets worked out here. And the Trump administration is claiming that they're well within their rights to give him the boot under the provisions of the federal green card policy, which basically says that the privileges of a green card can be revoked at any time at the discretion of the federal government. And apparently, being a terrorism sympathizer who passes out pro-terrorist group materials at a protest calling for the death of the Jews is a darn good reason. One might think. I don't know. Again, call me crazy. I actually think that's a pretty good reason to boot somebody out of the country. There are also allegations that he may have lied on his green card application, where you have to disclose your affiliation with certain groups, for instance, like, designated terrorist groups. By the way, Mahmoud Khalil, as much as an example may be being made of him, and his name is the one splashed over all of the headlines right now, he is far from the only person on this list. White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt said the Department of Homeland Security has identified other people at Columbia who engaged in similar activities and helped lead these anti-Semitic, anti-America protests and singing praises to Hamas butchers and calling for a globalized intifada, etc. But but that Columbia University is currently refusing to help them identify these individuals who are engaged in pro-Hamas activity because our universities are not actually education institutions anymore. They're not real universities anymore. They are indoctrination camps. They are brainwashing facilities for left-wing propaganda, including a hatred of America and Western civilization and rampant violence in the name of oppressed, people as defined by leftists, of course. And frankly, I'm over here thinking that there are quite a few American citizens who should have their citizenship revoked and be shipped over to one of these crap splat countries that they love so much. If you are anti-America, if you are calling for the destruction of America and its allies, if it sucks so bad here and we are all so awful, you shouldn't be a citizen of a country that you hate that much. Doesn't it stand to reason? I mean, go take your chances in the sandpit. If Allah really loves, queer, purple-haired gender benders the way y'all think he does, go test that theory. Be my guest, please. I'm sure his followers would absolutely love to make friends with some art majors from Seattle, while they're not busy torturing Jewish toddlers. We're going to hand you a one-way taxpayer-funded ticket, and you can go find out. But see, that's who leftists are up in arms over. That's who they will spend time protesting for. They don't protest when a college student gets, assaulted and brutally murdered by an illegal alien criminal and dumped on the side of the road. They don't protest when some dude beats the stuffing out of some girl in a boxing match because he doesn't like his own anatomy, but a foreigner who simps for terrorists gets the boot, and they show up in droves. And so do Democrats in Congress, it turns out. 14 members of the House of Representatives, all of them Democrats, signed a letter this week demanding that Mahmoud Khalil be released, including, of course, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Pressley, all of whom are known for their terrorism sympathies. Senator Chris Murphy, who is a Democrat from Joe Biden's home state of Delaware, made a whole social media video whining about how this poor misunderstood Columbia grad has disappeared because he was protesting. You simply cannot make this stuff up.
A young man by the name of Mahmoud Khalil, an immigrant and a legal permanent resident of the United States, is being held right now in prison, even though no criminal charges have been filed against him. And I want to tell you why that should matter to every single American. Khalil is a recent graduate of Columbia University. He opposed Israel's military operation in Gaza. He has deep animus toward Israel's policies and the U.S. support for those policies. He helped organize the protests over Gaza at his university last year. You can disagree with his views or his politics, but there is no evidence he has broken any law. But last weekend, Trump officials entered his apartment and took him into custody. They brought him to a detention facility in New Jersey at first, but when his family went to visit him, he wasn't there. For a while, his family and his lawyer had no idea where he was. They eventually found out that he was being held in a detention facility in Louisiana, and that's where he still is today. In dictatorships, they call this practice being disappeared. No charges, no claims of criminal behavior. The White House doesn't claim he did anything criminal. He's in jail because of his political speech. And here's why everybody should care. In America, your political speech is protected, whether or not the president likes what you say. But today, if you're loyal to Donald Trump, your speech is going to be protected, even if it's hate speech. You can be Marco Ellis, an employee of Doge, who said he, quote, was racist before it was cool, and, quote, normalize Indian hate. And the vice president of the United States will tweet in your defense. But if you are disloyal to Trump, or you're organizing against Trump's political agenda, your speech could be criminalized. You could find yourself in jail. Now, Trump chose to begin by disappearing a Palestinian immigrant, hoping that his place of birth and his immigrant status would just cause people to look the other way. But we cannot. Because once it becomes normal for the regime to disappear people simply for protest against the regime's policies, once a citizen or a resident of America can be locked away with no charges against them simply because they protested, there is no going back for America.
I gotta say, that is awfully rich coming from a Democrat senator. Considering Democrats weaponized the FBI against Trump supporters and pro-life advocates who prayed outside of abortion clinics They illegally abused the FISA court to spy on an American citizen to take down their opponent's political campaign. They signed a letter claiming that the Hunter Biden laptop story was Russian disinformation when it was not, and they had no proof of that. The number of times that Democrats have politicized and weaponized federal agencies is as long as the Jeffrey Epstein client list. And at this point, not, of course, that we're ever actually going to see that either. So Chris Murphy here can stuff all of his fake outrage about a politically weaponized system that targets its opponents. Also, by the way, I have no idea where he thinks he gets off because Mahmoud Khalil was not disappeared. We know exactly where he is. He's in federal custody. I'm not sure Chris Murphy knows what that word means. In a dictatorship, disappeared means grabbed off the street, secretly imprisoned, and more than likely killed. I mean, when Muslim fanatics disappear a woman for protesting hijab laws over in one of their, Islamic regimes, they stuff her into a car and nobody ever sees or hears from her again. So Murphy here is completely misusing this term in an effort to make this terrorism sympathizer look like some sort of political prisoner and make the Trump administration out to be a fascist regime, when that is not at all what's happening here. That is a lie. That is a bald-faced lie. Khalil was not arrested for peacefully protesting. He was detained and is potentially being deported if the Trump administration gets their way because he is a foreign-born person who is here in the United States by our good graces with admitted terrorism sympathies and is trying to recruit other people to that cause. That is a proven danger to this country. We shouldn't be freeing him. We should be rounding up and booting everybody like him. That is the proper response here. But this is how congressional Democrats are now spending their time, representing terrorist-loving migrants rather than Americans, or God forbid, U.S.-born Jewish students. They love other countries more than they love their own. It is painfully obvious at this point, and they have no problem whatsoever with violence or those who call for it as long as it's for one of their causes. And what's interesting is that the whole basis for their demanding Mahmoud Khalil's release from federal custody and back into the United States is hilariously free speech. Every single time some leftist falls back on the argument of free speech, I find it hysterical because the only speech that they want to be free is speech that they approve of. If you say things that they don't approve of, we got to shut that down immediately. And they call openly for government censorship. These people don't want free speech. They want pre-approved leftist speech. That's what they mean here. They say that he was simply, leading a protest and that protest is legal even if it's against the government or against America or even if people don't like what he has to say, to which I would say, yes, to an extent, if that's what was actually going on here, but that's not what these protests were. I mean, college students at both Columbia and other institutions all across the country are on camera openly calling for the death of the Jews and assaulting Jewish students on their way to class. That is not a legal protest. What we saw going on over the past year and a half at this point were not just legal, peaceful protests. These were not hippies just sitting there cross-legged, munching on hemp, singing Kumbaya. That's not what this was. Nor is it illegal, by the way, or unconstitutional to kick out a green card holder out of the country for spreading terrorism propaganda. I mean, what did he have to do? Go on a stabbing spree or ram his car into a crowd of people before we're allowed to give him the boot? I mean, this is ridiculous. Is that the threshold? Certainly seemed to be Biden's MO. I mean, shoot, Democrat cities, don't even care when migrants commit violent crimes. They'll let you back onto the street anyway. They still don't turn him over to ICE. What is the threshold for finally saying this person is a danger to this country and they should not be in the United States of America? Do Democrats even have a threshold for that? Is there any point at which a person is a danger to other people living here? A foreign-born person who poses a threat to Americans, to other migrants, to other legal residents, at which you say, that's the line. You just crossed it. You can't be here anymore. Democrats don't seem to have any standard at all by which they make that call. I mean, passing out pro-Hamas materials and calling for the death of the Jews and the destruction of Israel is not a protest. And you would think that Democrats, who are constantly accusing conservatives of inciting violence, would know that. But they say this is just free speech, right? This is just free speech. He was exercising his constitutional right to free speech, and you can't boot him out of the country for that. What a twist. What a massive denial of the facts. And it's funny because they certainly don't care about free speech when they attack somebody for refusing to use their made-up pronouns or, kowtow to their assault on reality when it comes to biological sex. We also saw that from Democrats in Congress this week. There was a congressional hearing that erupted in absolute chaos after a congressman dared to correctly refer to a biologically male member of Congress as a man. Which he is, as is every single male who has ever been born on this earth planet. Representative Sarah McBride is a man. He is a man. He will always be a man, regardless of what any science-denying gender benders in Congress have to say about it. This is Sarah McBride. He was born Tim McBride, and look, he can legally change his name to whatever he wants. Sarah, Mary, Tina Turner, Purple Pumpernickel Loaf, I don't really care. It doesn't matter because he was and he always will be a man, regardless of how he feels, regardless of what he thinks he is, regardless of what he may wish that he were. He will always be a man. But leftists are determined to erase gender, and women specifically. And they're making this an issue because McBride here is the first openly gender-confused person to serve in Congress. And so now the left is demanding that everybody else go along with this charade. So here's what happened when a Republican congressman, quote-unquote, misgendered McBride during a hearing this week by referring to him by grammatically correct pronouns.
I now recognize the representative from Delaware, Mr. McBride.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ranking Member Keating, also wonderful.
Mr.
I'm
Chairman,
sorry.
could you repeat your introduction again, please?
Yes, we have set the standard on the floor of the House, and I'm simply.
What is that standard, Mr. Chairman? Would you repeat what you just said when you introduced a duly elected representative from the United States of America? Please.
I will. The representative from Delaware, Mr. McBride.
Mr. Chairman, you are out of order. Mr. Chairman, have you no decency? I've come to know you a little bit, but this is not decent.
We will continue this
You
hearing.
will not continue it with me unless you introduce a duly elected representative the right way.
This hearing is adjourned.
Okay, so the first voice that you heard there in that clip, that was the chairman of the subcommittee here who identified McBride as a man. That's Keith Self. He's a Republican from Texas. And of course, McBride, if you caught, had to snarkily respond by calling him Madam Chair as a dig right back. So apparently it's fine for him to be rude and unprofessional and intentionally misgender someone. But it's not okay for somebody to call him exactly what he is, which is a man. And the congressman that you heard jump in there with the all high and mighty self-righteous speech and call Congressman Self everything but a white dude, that was Congressman Bill Keating. He's a Democrat from Massachusetts. And this is all going down in Congress. At the highest level of our government, between elected officials who are tasked with passing laws that affect our lives. I mean, a government that is responsible for creating and implementing the very framework for the structure that we all live in, the society that we all live in, that has to be rooted in objective, unchangeable fact and truth and reality. And it has to deal with reality, not fantasy, simply for, functionality's sake. And yet we've got a clown show of people screaming because a dude in makeup and heels wants to be a woman, and apparently we're all just supposed to accept this. And anybody who doesn't immediately becomes the target of an angry lynch mob. And we see that from Congress, we see that all the way through just about every segment of our society, to this point where you are not allowed to resist this. You are not allowed to say, I disagree, or I can't go along with that, or here are the problems that causes, without immediately getting buried underneath an avalanche of hatred. There's a British woman who opened a women's-only gym, who is now facing harassment and even death threats from pro-trans activists because she is now excluding gender-confused men who think that they are women from participating at her facility because she says it's very sex-specific, and it's sex-specific for a reason. So this is Natalie Barnett, and 4 years ago, she opened a gym called The Girls Spot, which is a gym for women based in South London in the UK. And what's interesting is that back about 4 years ago, when she launched this business back in 2021, she very openly stated in plain terms that her gym would be welcoming to trans women or men who think that they're women. So this is not some conservative person that we're dealing with here who doesn't, believe in gender bending. Okay, this is actually a fairly left-leaning woman who was perfectly fine allowing gender-confused men into her women's-only gym, but she started to realize over the course of running this business in the last 4 years that that was causing problems for her customers and therefore her business, and it was starting to hurt the mission that she set out to accomplish by starting a women's only gym in the first place. Because see, usually when women seek out women's only spaces, there's a reason. There's some reason that they want to be around other women and not men. That's the whole entire point. And what Barnett began to realize is that a lot of the women who were coming to her gym, specifically seeking out her gym above any others, were victims of trauma. They had had negative experiences with men in gyms before. They had some very deeply personal reason to seek out the company of women to the exclusion of men, which is fine. There are people who have been through things that make them seek out a space like that. And so Barnett began changing her gym's focus to cater to the needs of the women who were walking through the door. And so she released a video explaining these updated policies and how she was going to be doing business moving forward. Here was that explainer that she posted to social media this week.
In 2021, 4 years ago, I made a tweet, and the tweet referenced my women's only gym, the Girls Spot, and being trans inclusive. Now, when I made that tweet in 2021, I had just announced my plans to open a women's only gym. I hadn't thought out the vision or the mission or what it would entail, but all I knew is that I wanted to open a gym. We are now 4 years later, and I have had a great deal of time to figure that out. The Girls Spot Gym exists as a safe space for women because women are facing gym harassment, sexual assault, and sexual violence inside of gyms. And I know that because I'm a victim of it. So the meaning of the Girls Spot Gym is now entirely different. And I say this to say that whilst we are a gym, inside we are focusing on self-defense classes, Muay Thai, boxing classes, as well as workshops and activations around PCOS and training on your menstrual cycle, all of which occur to biological women. Majority of the women who are seeking my women's only gym, the Girls Spot, are coming here because they have faced some level of gym intimidation or sexual violence and assault that has been perpetrated by men. So as the owner of the gym, it is very important to make it clear how my women's only gym will be operating, and it will be operating as a single sex space for biological women.
So to any normal person, this makes sense, right? I mean, everything about that makes sense. The thing that doesn't make sense to me is the fact that she had to put out a couple-minute long explainer video on why she was only letting women into her women's only gym. That's the weird part. That this necessitates any explanation whatsoever other than just this is a gym for women. And that should just be understood to everybody. Or at least it should to anybody with common sense. If you're a dude, even if you're a dude who thinks you're not a dude, it's not like you don't have plenty of options, right? Gyms are a dime a dozen. It's not like there's a lack of gyms to go to. But you're talking about a space where, a lot of people wear tight clothing, workout clothing. You're doing physical work. You're not necessarily paying attention to everything that's going on around you. You're utilizing changing areas and shower facilities. The gym is a particularly vulnerable place compared to other public spaces. So it's understandable why women, particularly those who've had certain negative experiences, might want a sex-specific space where they can feel comfortable changing or showering or getting ready for work or whatever. All of this makes perfect sense. So especially if you're trying to offer a full-service gym that teaches whole body fitness, right? I mean, Barnett is exactly right. Women are highly impacted by their reproductive cycle and hormonal changes that fluctuate with time, with age, things that men don't have to deal with in the same way, just like men have very sex-specific health considerations that I and other women will never have to worry about and can't relate to and probably will never understand. That's okay. We are different. We are created different. Our health as women is different. Okay. And this woman is running a business that caters to sex-specific health, which is rooted in biology, which a man who simply believes himself to be a woman is not going to share. As a matter of fact, I think one of the most dangerous aspects of this war on gender and reality, other than the obvious issues of, safety and fairness and all of those things, is that a woman, as a woman, I can tell you, we do not educate young women nearly enough about their own biology and how it impacts wellness, or how they can take better care of themselves and, understand their own body better and their own cycles better. All of those things I think are woefully lacking. And when you erase gender, when you say that anybody can be a woman simply because you feel like a woman, when you have gender-confused men taking TikToks of themselves claiming that they're experiencing menstrual cramps when they don't have a uterus with which to experience cramps, when you pretend that all of that is just as valid as what biological women, actual women, go through, then I think that you are seriously running the risk of downplaying the very real issues that women are facing that they need to understand better, rather than ignore in order to accommodate the feelings of gender-confused men. And here's this woman who is simply trying to offer a business that caters to those needs. And she's getting put through the ringer for it. I mean, her video immediately triggered this avalanche of angry comments, people accusing Barnett of discrimination, claiming that, gender-deluded men are just as likely to be victims of sexual assault, just as likely to need self-defense classes, falsely stating that, trans women don't sexually assault people, which we know for a fact is not true. We have the receipts. I mean, this is the same thing that happened to J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter series, when she took a firm stance on the biological reality that men cannot become women. This is a left-leaning woman who otherwise pretty much falls in line with leftist issues, except she finally came down and said, look, as a feminist, I'm not willing to just throw women under the bus and pretend that they don't exist or that being a woman is not a real concrete thing rooted in unchangeable fact. She's been forced to defend her women's only charity for sex abuse victims from people that demand that she include gender-confused men, which of course would defeat the very purpose of having a, haven for traumatized women who are looking to get space away from men. But hey, what is a rape victim's PTSD when compared to the feelings of mentally confused dudes who want to wear fake eyelashes? I mean, am I right? And women are the ones that have to sacrifice all of this on the altar of the left's gender war. You notice it only ever goes one way. It's women who are having to give up their sports teams and their trophies and their championships to men. A woman can identify as a man all she wants, and it's not nearly as much of a threat to men, if at all. I mean, go put on a jockstrap and try out for the NBA all you want. See how that works out for you. But when a man decides to compete in the women's league, or when a boy decides to compete against girls, it's the ladies that pay the price. Every time. Every time. Very, very infrequently, if at all. I'm trying to think of a single one, as a matter of fact. Very infrequently do you see a male who is at the top of his game, winning championships on the guys' team, who just decides to become a lady and start swimming or running or whatever for the girls' team. Very rarely. It's usually the men that can't hack it on the guys' team who then make the switch to the ladies' team, and all of a sudden they start dominating. That's the way it always goes. Just like men aren't getting assaulted in bathrooms by gender-confused women. That is not a thing. Women, on the other hand, they become targets for perverts with weird sex fetishes. Just last month, there was a man with a decades-long history of sex crimes against children who was arrested after being found lurking and exposing himself in multiple women's restrooms in Virginia, including at least 2 schools. 2 schools. Why was he there to begin with? Well, he was allowed into the women's room because he says he now identifies as a woman. This was in Fairfax County, right next door to where we live, in Fairfax County, where if you say that you are a woman, you are allowed into pretty much every single ladies' room, every single women's facility, and nobody's allowed to ask any questions. We're not allowed to prohibit it. We're not allowed to even verify it. And now multiple women and children have been victimized, which I was given to understand never, ever, ever happens, right? And yet, here we have yet another story. So Richard Cox, that's his actual last name, no pun intended, who is already a convicted sex criminal, has been charged with nearly 24 counts of exposing himself to women and children in women's locker rooms where he was allowed to be due to his identifying as a woman. There was one occasion last fall where Cox allegedly exposed himself to a group of women and girls at Washington Liberty High School, which is a public school in Arlington, and it has an indoor pool that is open to the public outside of regular school hours. This is according to WJLA, who reports an Arlington mother told 7 News that Cox exposed his fully naked body in front of her and her 9-year-old daughter in the Washington Liberty High School girls' locker room in September of 2024 after swimming lessons for children. Witnesses said Cox was allowed to use the girls' locker room at Washington Liberty High School because Arlington Public Schools allows people to use school bathrooms and locker rooms based on gender identity, not biological sex, and apparently Cox told pool staff that he identified as transgender. This guy was also caught creeping in at least 2 schools and 2 public recreation and fitness centers last year alone. He has a history as a pervert who preys on women and children that dates all the way back to the 1990s, where he was convicted of taking indecent liberties with children. He had been caught exposing himself to kids in a gymnasium in 1992. He's already served at least 5 prison sentences from the 80s all the way up to 2018. He has been wanted since 2020 for failing to register as a sex offender, and he was most recently caught on police body cam footage lurking in a women's locker room at a rec center in Fairfax County, which is a predominantly blue county that's just west of Washington, D.C. And here's the kicker. Right? So Cox, who was referred to in multiple local news reports using they, them pronouns, which are grammatically incorrect. You do not use they, them to refer to a singular person, but we're just throwing out all the rules of the English language in order to accommodate somebody's preferred identity, even if they're a sexual deviant, a pervert who likes to creep on little girls in locker rooms and expose himself. We still have to make sure that we accommodate his feelings and recognize his pervert identity, right? He now says that his civil rights were violated when he was told to get out of the women's room, despite him being a man and a convicted sex criminal who was whipping it out in front of little girls.
Okay, my understanding of the sex offender registry, okay, because I understand that they're concerned about my history and that's the reason they're banning me. Now, my civil rights as a transgender person allows me to use a public facility, including the restrooms or changing rooms that identify with my gender. You could see on my ID that I'm recognized by the Commonwealth of Virginia as female. So exercising my civil rights is not a criminal offense. So them pulling up my information on the sex offender registry and using it to stop me from exercising my civil rights as a transgender person is a criminal misuse of the sex offender registry. They can use that registry to try and stop someone from committing a criminal offense, which I was not doing. I was only exercising my civil rights.
He's now saying that his civil rights were violated. He says that he's a woman, which is why he was allowed into these facilities in the first place. None of this would have gotten this far if somebody somewhere with a brain had been willing to say, you're a dude and you're not coming in here. This is a women's room. There are little girls getting dressed in here. You are a grown man. You are not coming in here. But see, we can't say that. We can't say that. We can't even question it. You say that you're a woman? Go right on in. And now he says that his rights were being violated when he was told to leave. And the fact that we even have to worry about some whack job left-wing judge going along with that is highly disturbing. I don't know the likelihood of that happening. I don't know what judge this guy is going to go in front of. Hopefully somebody with at least a modicum of common sense, with a desire to protect women and young girls from creeps like this. But the fact that we even have to worry about that, because we live in a world now where simply saying that you feel like a woman is enough. And you get canceled if you question that or you challenge that. This is where we are. But we get told that it's no risk at all to let mentally ill men who think that they're women into private changing and shower facilities or bathrooms with little girls. There's no risk whatsoever. No reason for women and girls to want their own spaces. All of that is just made up paranoia and hysteria. No, it matters. It matters a great deal, because the consequences of ignoring gender realities and the risks that come with just throwing that out in order to accommodate somebody's feelings are very real. And they affect real people who then have to live with it. Kind of like all of the people who now have to live with the consequences of Joe Biden letting a bunch of murderers and rapists into the country. Their daughter might be dead, but see, Democrats in Congress can just keep pretending that that's not a reality because it's not their family member who is lying there with their skull bludgeoned in, dead in a ditch somewhere. What do they care? They're surrounded by walls and security guards. It doesn't matter to them. They can live in this insane fantasy land where this stuff doesn't happen, and they can blame all of the rest of us for being hysterical because they're not the ones being affected by it. But there are people who are, and it happens all the time. But see, they want you to look at somebody like Sarah McBride in this hearing here and say, look, just use this person's preferred pronouns. It doesn't hurt you at all. It's the respectful thing to do. Just use their pronouns and everybody can be happy. Just go along with it, you bigot. No, it matters. Language matters. Holding this ground absolutely matters. We've actually changed our policy here at MRC-TV, where we will no longer be using the term transgender to refer to mentally ill, gender-deluded people who do not accept the biological reality of their own sex. We will not be using the term transgender, because there is no such thing as being transgender. There is gender dysphoria. You can believe that you are the opposite sex. You can desire to be the opposite sex, but you cannot transition to the opposite sex. There is no such thing. And we are going to stop letting the left co-opt language and force us to use terms that are anti-science, anti-biology, anti-reality, simply to accommodate the world that they wish we all lived in. The one that they want to force upon the rest of us. And listen, even if I were willing to entertain using a person, a gender-deluded person's preferred pronouns or whatever, which I'm not because they're stupid, the left's never-failing insistence upon coming up with an infinite combination of made-up words to, identify people would render it literally impossible to do so in the real world, in all practicality. Because, the point is not actually the pronouns, if you think about it. This isn't about respect. This isn't even about gender. The point is the attention. That's the point. And the more bizarre you are, the more attention you get. You don't get attention by sticking close to normal. So, example, here's a gender-confused, non-binary humanoid who in truth is apparently a woman who just really, really, really wants attention, who spoke before the Wisconsin State Legislature this week in opposition to Assembly Bill 100. So this would ban student athletes from participating on sports teams based on their gender identity. It would instead restrict sex-specific sports to, specific sexes the way that it should be, and we shouldn't need a law saying it, also known as common sense for those of us not living in crazy land. But that's clearly where this woman has decided to plant her flag and build her home, because during her address to lawmakers, she started by identifying herself using her preferred pronouns, which made even less sense than it normally does. So try to follow this crazy train here.
My pronouns are they, them, or at least that's what I share with people most often. But for this particular meeting, I will come out fully as saying that my pronouns are she, they, him.
So now if you heard that and you're still trying to figure out how exactly it works, let me help you out here. It doesn't. It doesn't. If you're lost as a goose in a snowstorm, join the club. What she's literally saying, whether she understands enough about grammatical structure or not, she's saying that she's a woman when she's the subject of a sentence. She is a man when she's the object of the sentence. And she is a multi-personed glob, I suppose, whenever it suits her, which is apparently when she's at a hearing and speaking in defense of letting boys clobber girls in sports when they don't have the talent to win against other dudes. This gets even better, by the way. At one point, she tried to explain this insanity, and here's how that came out.
Now, I don't usually go into that because it becomes a quite interesting, delicate conversation about what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman. And I get that. That is a conversation that we don't generally have as young people or even as adults in our current culture. Fair enough. So I will simply say what I told my 60-year-old father, who was also born and raised in the Madison area, like myself. I asked him, do you know what it means to be a man? And to his credit, he said, no, I don't. And then I asked him, do you know what it means to be a woman? And again, to his credit, he said, no, I don't. And then I looked at him and I said, yeah, that's pretty much it. That's where I land. I land at an understanding that my womanhood, as I was assigned at birth, does not come from my ability to produce children or to behave in a feminine way. And my manhood does not come in the form of my genitalia.
No, it doesn't. It comes from your DNA, as a matter of fact, which branded you forever and always a female, whether you like it or not, whether you accept it or not, whether everybody around you performs in this skit that you have created for yourself or not. Your delusion comes from a mental illness and a desperate need to feel special. Because someone somewhere along the line failed you. And I am so sorry for that. But it is not incumbent upon the rest of us to reorder and restructure society to accommodate your delusion and refusal to live in reality. Also, by the way, we have established that your dad has been absolutely worthless here because apparently he's too stupid to define the words man and woman, which is an exceptionally easy thing for anybody to do, except apparently leftists. And these are the people that we're supposed to be accommodating. This is the insanity that the left pretends is normal and demands that we pretend is normal. We're supposed to restructure our language and redefine gender and reorganize just about every segment of our society to cater to these people's delusions, regardless of how bizarre and unrealistic they are. I mean, it's not like these people just exist and there's 5 of them and we can all just kind of ignore it because it's nuts and that's that. No, leftists all the way up to the halls of Congress and our state legislatures are demanding to the point of screaming at us that we act like this is okay. Just like they scream at us that terrorism sympathizers are just protesters exercising their free speech. Just like they scream at us that we are not letting violent people come into this country. It's just families in search of a better life and little toddlers who would otherwise grow up in gang-infested hoods, and nobody that is a threat to you is coming across our borders, and never mind the bodies piling up in the ditch over there or the apartment complex that just got taken over at rifle point by a bunch of Venezuelan thugs. We're supposed to just ignore our lying eyes, ignore all of the campus protesters calling for the death of the Jews, ignore the border crisis and the fact that now you've got people camped out on the sidewalk in your otherwise used to be peaceful neighborhood. Never mind the fact that, we're pumping your kids full of gender confusion in schools and making you have to relearn language in order to accommodate everybody's made-up nonsense that they want to go by. Ignore biological reality and the threats that all of this poses and the fact that women are being targeted in otherwise safe facilities where they should feel secure and now can't. Or all of the women on sports teams or in, female prisons or in sex-designated spaces that are now getting completely trampled on and ignored, because remember, you're not allowed to question any of this. This is absolute insanity. And they want all of the rest of us to go along with it. I absolutely refuse. Which is why we're changing our policy here. We are not going to restructure our language in the manner with which leftists say is now acceptable. We will not do it. We stand for biological reality. We stand for strong borders. We stand for decency and common sense. Terrorism sympathizers should be booted as quickly as possible out of this country. You do not have to go home, but you cannot stay here. Try Europe. I hear they don't care. Or I guess at least they're starting to a little bit, because it's not working out too well for them over there. Mark my words, the chickens from all of this insanity will come home to roost, and that is not a society that any of us want to be a part of. And with that, that's the Brittany Hughes Show for today. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you guys back here next Thursday. In the meantime, head over to Apple Podcasts, hit the subscribe button on the Brittany Hughes Show so you don't ever miss an episode. Also, make sure you subscribe to the Newsbusters podcast with Tim Graham on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. I'll see you back here next Thursday. In the meantime, I hope you have a fantastic weekend and a blessed week ahead.
Thank you.